so we'll just go with full big picture here. And let me just go over a little bit. So part of why we wanted to talk about it, not just in terms of mapping, but then, okay, you mapped it, so what? You know, what are you going to do with it? So we really felt like it was important to talk about it in terms of strategy as well. But first, just to touch on the point of multi-threading and what does that term mean in case it's not familiar to folks. And basically, it was first a sales term, you know, to try and make certain that you're going to get it over the dotted line, right? To make certain it gets signed on the dotted line. And that multi-threading, because there's so many people involved often in a sale, where you're really trying to make certain that you're talking to all of the key stakeholders, right? And so it's called multi-threading because you're basically threading your way through the organization and making certain that you have a touch point with everyone, that you're talking to all the influencers and the decision makers, right? Does that make sense in terms of just the idea of just the definition of multi-threading? Any questions on that? All right. So especially though, when you get to the post-sales motion, it continues to be important, right? And this is where you want to understand, and this is where I knew that Percy would be able to contribute to this some too, because we even started to talk about personas in his session back in January, where we're talking about those account personas, right? And when you think about who are all the important personas, you know, throughout the organization, and what do they need, what's important to them, what are their KPIs, you know, because crazy to think, but they're not all about you and your product, right? They've got a day job, they're trying to get their things done. And so by understanding them, by sort of looking at it from their perspective, standing in their shoes, and what's important to them, if anything you're doing with your product is going to help them achieve their goals, then you know that your product is in good standing with them and with their company, right? So that's part of what's important. Now, if you find that your product is not all that important to any of the KPIs or business metrics of across your customer account or across your customer base, well, that's a really good sign that you're just a nice to have product. And when it comes time to cut out, you know, cut costs from their budget, if you're a nice to have, you should know that all your accounts are at risk. If you can't connect to what's really vital to their business and help them understand how you're vital to their business, then, you know, poof, you're gone, right? So it's just something to keep in mind. What else did you want to add in either about multi-threading or as we're talking about identifying the players and personas, Cinthia?
Jan, you touched on so many of the real key points on this, but it's so true. It's about understanding who the stakeholders are, whether they're end users, influencers, decision makers, procurement, implementation, whatever those guys are, and what motivates them. And that's exactly right. What are their KPIs? How do they win? And then, you know, targeting your talk track to that and the kind of like value that you add to them, you know, to help them quote unquote win, I think is so critical, and it's going to get you closer to you know, to getting like smoother renewals, or of course any upsells, cross sells, opportunities that you might have or need to have as a CSM.
And if you're looking at the links to the slides, we do have, you know, some templates. Just a second. Whoops. Cancel. Sorry. All of a sudden my something wants to download. But so if you look at these templates, let me go ahead and you can download these slides and you'll have these links too. But when you look at sort of some of the templates for relationship mapping, you might want to actually set it up where it looks like, you know, an org chart, right? If you're an individual contributor and you're working with enterprise, Gina, then you can think about it, right? Like in terms of how are you going to map this out? You know, and also when we were when Carly came and Carly Agar came, and one of the things we touched on was goal trees, and it looked like some of those other, the other relationship mapping, examples like this, right? Where you look at, what an organization looks like and setting up the KPIs and the goal trees. She's going to be coming back in April, actually, where we're going to be digging into that topic. But so you can even put not just people, but their KPIs, right, in this area. So anyway, there's some resources here. Another way you might want to just do it is like when you're looking through at just sort of a spreadsheet where you almost kind of keep track of, who these people are. Are they external to your company? Are they in your company? Things like that, where you can just kind of keep, whether it's a spreadsheet or do it as a CRM, any variety of ways in which you might want to think about how to map this out. But you want to start to think about when you document the reason why. It's like, oh, why would I do this for my own internal organization, right? When you think about this, or why would I do it even for one of my customers? I know this stuff. I know who they are. But when you do that, when you document it, the act of doing that, it helps to show you where your strengths are and where you may have gaps. And it's by looking at it and the act of, are you kidding me? I have
You
been
muted yourself?
muted the whole time.
No, just for
No,
like a
no,
second.
the act
Oh,
of,
it just
and then you
muted on
cut
its
off.
own. Okay, good. Gosh, I was like, what? But anyway, so but going through the act of this, right, where you're actually, going through and looking at where your strengths are and where your gaps are. It's when you go through either the visual or the documentation of it is when you start to realize this. And that's why it's so important to do something like this. Now, if you are, say, an individual contributor and you have hundreds of customers, you may not do it on a per customer basis, but you may take a look at your book of business and say, well, who are some of the key customers that maybe are coming up for renewal soon, or are actually worth a little bit more than the rest? Or you might just do it in the sense of personas, right? And do you overall have the personas, in your CRMs, identified or something like that? Whereas if you're an enterprise CSM, you are going to take a look and really put the names to it and all of that. And if you're looking at it internally, if you're in a small company, it might be simpler to do because like, hey, there's 10 of us, pretty easy to do, right? But it's still a good thing to go through and put the characteristics and what's strong, what's, where your weakness is, is there that someone in the company? I was in a company of like, maybe had 60 people, and there were some key people that they were just pains. And I was just like, I don't have the time. And you know what? And he was on the executive leadership team, and I kind of ignored him, and it did turn around and bite me. It did. It created problems for me, not just on a regular basis, but it was a big part of how I ended up leaving the company, was because I never fixed that relationship. I just never put the foundation in. I never put the time in. I didn't fix it. And so you want to think about those things, right? Not just where your strengths are, but where are your weaknesses, and really treat them as importantly as the strengths. Cinthia, sorry, I was kind of going on.
No. I love when you get on a roll. It's good. All good stuff. And honestly, and I think that because this, how important this is. And I think strengths and gaps assessment is so critical because we all know one of the most powerful things about multi-threading is we never want to be in that position where we have one champion and that champion leaves. And then we've got nothing. We're extremely vulnerable. So this strengths and gaps assessment will show like, hey, what's happening with this space? Who do we have good relationships with? Who should we be like kind of reaching out to? If it's not us, who in our team might have a relationship? How can we like get together and kind of band together and get a dinner with them or a coffee with them or a call? Whatever it might be. And it's something I know it's tricky because depending on your book of business, as Jan alluded to, if you've got 50 customers or 100 customers or more, you can't always do that with this. So you have to be very, very strategic. Start with obviously your most strategic accounts, the biggest accounts, and then work your way through. But I'm telling you right now, this is a long-term view, but it's going to pay off. you're really going to not just like learn how to kind of cultivate those relationships and understand what matters to each of the different personas, but it's going to strengthen your relationship and make that renewal process much, much smoother.
And the reason why we have this here, key objectives and timelines, and what this means is to understand from your customer perspective, or if you're looking at this from the internal perspective, you know, if there's a stakeholder that you're mapping internally, what are their key objectives? What are their KPIs? What are their timelines? What's important in their timeline, right? And so when you're thinking about this strategically, when you're thinking about it with a customer, right, then you're thinking about, you know, maybe it's end of month or end of quarter, you know, or something like that that's important to them. How might you help them in some way? Or is it better to be like, hey, I know you're busy. I'm going to follow up with you in 3 weeks because the next 2 weeks are busy for you. Something that just shows that empathy. You know, it depends on kind of where you are with that relationship. But internally, especially when you think about trying to make any sort of traction, whether you're an individual contributor or whether you are a leader, anytime you're trying to impact change, and we're impacting change all the time with our customers and within our companies. When you think about product and the feedback you're giving to product, to marketing, to sales, right? We're always trying to impact change. The relationships that you have. Oh, Cinthia, I really liked that story that you had actually back when you were in sales. And remember, there was like the way that you were treating, there was somebody like who had all manual processes, and you always made best friends with them, and there were others that treated them like, oh, these are lowly people.
That's correct. That's correct. When I was like actually one of my first banking jobs, we had so I was on a trading desk, so we would execute like a verbal execution, but there would have to be a confirmation that had to go out, all this follow-up paperwork, and that came from our quote unquote back office. And all the salespeople were really mean to the like they just didn't care. They just send it out, send it out. And I was like, we need to work together. And that's exactly right, Jan. Like, I literally like would reach out to them and say, do you have everything you need? Did I provide all the information? Can you send it out? Can we align and make sure it's going to the right person? And they really appreciated those phone calls just to, first of all, be acknowledged as a human being. And then also that they felt that they were part of the process. They were like, yeah, hey, we just had a big win. We just did this big deal and you're part of it. And guess what? They were an important part of it because we actually at that stage needed the confirmation signed or the deal wasn't, it wasn't valid. Anyway, the point was these that team really stepped up whenever I needed a favor, a little shortcut or a question answered. They would drop everything else and help me just for being a decent human being. So it's just acknowledging what it is, the details they needed, and even just acknowledging their presence made such a big difference. Where others were like, "Oh God, that back office is horrible." I'm like, "Are they?" Because I could pick up the phone right now; they'll do 10 things for me, no problem, right? And it was all about how you interact with them. And again, thinking of the long term, thinking about it collaboratively, including people and understanding what they needed to help them succeed in their roles.
Right. And so, so then basically what we're saying is that what you want to do strategically then is build out a plan. Once you've assessed the strengths and relationships, any gaps, that you may have, all of those things, whether it's for your account or internally, you want to then build out a plan. How are you going to, what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Understanding what they're trying to achieve. And then you want to build out your plan from there and think about what that timeline of that plan is. And sometimes it's about building a relationship and understanding, or let's say maybe you are working with annual or multi-year contracts and it's really short and coming up and you don't have a relationship. So maybe you need to then identify in the relationship, in the company, who does have a relationship with the decision maker. If so, then hopefully you have a strong relationship internally. You go to them, you say, hey, we're working on this renewal or this expansion. Can I get your help with this decision maker? Can you come and into it and maybe, and you get them on board, right? That's how then those internal relationships relate to where you are with your account relationships as well. in terms of getting over your own dotted lines. So then here, what we were just talking about here for those internal relationships, identifying who's important within your organization, applying the same approach, and then how you're building out the same type of organization and timeline plan. So we're kind of speaking to it on the other one too. And as I always say, you know, if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, in fact, it didn't happen, right? So it's not enough to think about it or go and work on your own. You have to go and build those relationships with people in the organization, help them understand what you're doing, what you're achieving, and communicate with them about that. When they understand what you're doing, when you show an interest in what they're doing, then all of a sudden they have an appreciation for you, for the work you've done, and for you know, just basically what you're doing in CS and what you're doing with the customers. And that's critical these days in a time when, you know, companies are always having to check to see if they're profitable and are they meeting their revenue goals, right? And if the people understand within the organization how critical you are, how critical your team is to getting over the cross line for that revenue and towards those revenue goals, then they understand it and then you stick around. But if you don't communicate it, this tree never fell. That's just what I'm going to say about it. Tree never fell.
Oh, love that, Jan. That is spot on. You know, and I think you touched on a couple things that are really valuable for the internal relationships because you do want to demonstrate why you're valuable. You do want to demonstrate what, you know, the value add. And I know I was telling you this when we chatted about this topic. You know, I used to think that I'll just do all the hard work. The hard work will speak for itself. It doesn't. You need to amplify that. You need to work cross teams. And also too, every company I've worked at has always said how much they despise silos and want collaboration. If you're that person that's doing that, that's understanding how to work with others and what their roles are and how to help them win and create joint wins, people will want to work with you. They're like, this person's the person that gets them from idea to action to execution, and they're going to want to align with you, which also makes you very sticky, particularly in this really crazy world of just mass flipping layoffs. You want to keep yourself off that list. This is a sort of way collaborating internally and demonstrating that value is a great way to kind of hopefully keep you off those lists.
Jan, you're muted.
Oh, Jane, you muted. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Of course, today I'm sound is my challenge, among other things. But hey, Percy, I'm just gonna give you a heads up that I wanted to include you on this conversation because I know that as head of digital CS, which is, you know, relatively recent role for you, that you've had to step up and work across the organization, and you're in a very large organization, you know, a very large enterprise organization of how many, like 40, 50, 60,000 people?
50,000, yeah, 50,000 people.
50,000. And
Right.
so like there's a serious map going on just for your internal organization, right?
Yeah, and for us, it's really digital customer success is essentially a new thing for HPE the past 6 months. And there are a lot of people who are a bit afraid, right? Because there's a lot of automation that will come with it. And so it's not going to automate some of the traditional CS activities, but there's an opportunity to automate some of the traditional delivery activities as well. So we have to go talk to many of the delivery leaders who show some resistance, right? Because they're kind of looking at this and they're like, well, AI is going to encroach on my territory. So there's a lot of really trying to demonstrate the value we're going to bring to people and how we're going to not just free up time, but then allow people to have to be in more value add relationship building type of activities instead of more tactical things that they might be doing today. So this is certainly relevant. The change management around it is difficult.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. So, and literally when you're in a large organization like Percy is, you can potentially meet new people all the time. And so what are you doing to follow up on it? You know, are you reaching out and saying, hey, let's have a one-on-one, you know, conversation? and the impact that that has when you're leading change, as Percy is doing right now, right? And change that can feel, exciting, by some folks and scary to others. And reading the room and understanding how to connect, right? So it's just something to be aware of, and how you want to apply that then for any of these particular situations, whether it's internal or external.
Right.
So what we're going to do is send you out to breakout sessions. Have you, or how will you, map out your customer relationships and strategies? And have you, or how will you, map out your internal relationships and strategies? Those are the two questions. You can download these slides. You can also download, can we just put in the chat one more time? Also the breakout notes, be sure you download that. And then I will put you all out to breakout groups. And, it's funny because I was just looking over in the chat while you were gone and realized we didn't really talk about how relationship mapping relates to the job search too. And of course it really does, right? I mean, Teal, if you go to tealhq.com, but otherwise it's Teal. They actually have a place where you can, add in all of those details, and it'll bring in information about the company and that sort of thing. So, it's just something you want to think about, how you're tracking who you're connecting with, in especially in your target companies, right? What kinds of things came up in your breakout sessions? I have a little bit of FOMO, right? But I stay out here to help people get in and out. What did I miss?
We had a great.
Okay.
Oh yeah, now everyone's gonna jump in at the same time. You guys go ahead.
No, go ahead,
Frank.
Frank.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. We had a great conversation just about thinking about ways of mapping. I've used this elements of value in the past, which is a framework developed by Bain & Company and published in Harvard Business Review.
Okay.
They have two versions. If you're in customer success for more consumers, there's a good version for you. And then another version that's for businesses if you're enterprise. And just understanding exactly, like getting clear about what value you do want to deliver, instead of having this kind of big amorphous, well, I want to deliver value. Well, what is that value that you want to deliver? So that kind of gives the language around it. But then the importance of kind of developing templates around that so that you can really scale the process of mapping these accounts. And then we talked about the benefits of it, kind of turning customers into advocates. If you're really able to deliver value, you win them over and build a relationship with them, and then they become your champions, helping you kind of track job changes and movement within accounts as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kimberly or
yeah, I just saw the link there, and we'll definitely add that into the Slack and put it over in the slides too, because you're so right. I mean, you want to connect it to value, and that's kind of part of what we're attempting to do when we're talking about KPIs, but just straight out value is an important thing to mention, right?
Yeah. I had an additional thing too, that we were actually in the same group. Sorry.
No, go for it.
But I wanted to raise this with the larger group because, part of it was, I was saying that I just started with this new role. And before I started, when I got access to the Google Suite, I started looking at different people's calendars to see how they're spending their time. And I noticed that, like, even though this company says that, like, they have a strong desire to expand the accounts and, everything post sales, like most people's calendars just have the kind of like regular cadence meetings with each clients, like, oh, every week we're meeting with the team or we're meeting with the admin or whatever. And so, like, to me, I'm thinking like, well, how you spend your time is going to affect, what you're going to get. So, I mean, I'm hopeful that when I kind of get my actual accounts that I can do some of that, but like still try to have some of that. Like, I was expecting I would see a lot of like one-on-one meetings, like, here's my intro meeting with this stakeholder, here's this one that I'm meeting, and so I think it's sometimes interesting to think about what you put as your priority and then how does that line up with what's on your calendar.
And think about it too, though, before you start scheduling, those meetings, and it's great to do the one-on-ones. And when you're new, it's a great opportunity, like, hey, getting to know you. I want to understand what's important for your business. I'd like to schedule some time with you, right? And that can be a great time to do it. But also keep in mind, like, if they don't see it as valuable time, or if you don't set up the agenda in such a way that it's a value to their time, right? Especially when you're working with the executive level, then that, so you want to be sure you set it up correctly, right? So because that first time you make that impression is really important, and can impact if they think, I'm going to go back to Kimberly again on this, right? And versus, not. So definitely take some time to think about who those stakeholders are, learn as much as you can about their perspective and what they need, so that when you come to that meeting, you're adding that value that you hope to lead to do, right? Because that's a great instinct, what you're talking about right there. It's fantastic,
Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. What other things did I miss in the groups? All right, Stan, excellent.
Hey, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Our group, I think, adding to the discussion, somebody mentioned about mutual sharing of relationships between yourselves and the client themselves, and trying to understand each other's organization. I thought was rather interesting, that we talked about, and you never think about, you like to keep things close to the vest, and that was something that I found surprising and very helpful. The other thing was, it was good to hear Fran with her new role, wanting to, make an enterprise level connections and plan these things out more so than before. So kudos to her for taking that venture and mapping out those relationships. So I think that, we talked about frequent surveys, keeping an eye out on different reactions of clients that usually answered the surveys were in a negative way. So at least that was a cue to identify and learn different relationships that are happening there. We talked about the smaller clients not really having a higher maintenance or a higher requirement in having so many numbered relationships versus the enterprise as well. And we did have a couple of tools that we posted up in the chat as well. I think it was theorg.com as one of the tools, and
theorg.com.
Theorg.com.
You almost want to call it theorg.org, right?
I know, they should use
Right,
that as a...
The other one is the officialboard.com.
There you go. Thank you. So that's all I wanted to share.
Oh, that's great. And the other one you said was the official board?
Yes.
The officialboard.com. Okay. So.
And it's in the chat.
Okay. Oh, these are in the, well, I don't know if they're made it to the main chat though. I think they were just in your group chat. Or did you put it in the notes?
I have it in the notes, and I will add it to the main chat. You're right. Thank you, Jan.
All right. Yeah. What other thoughts and ideas came up? Any aha moments? Who's been doing this already? Who's a pro at this? Anybody want to raise their hand as saying, yep, I'm a pro? Or are we all kind of novices?
Well, I wasn't going to say I'm a pro, but I was going to say that I set this up for my team before, and I created a playbook to go with it so that everybody was using the same kind of naming convention for the buyer types and the influencers and like those kind of labels. So there were a few different categories. Yeah, so that, and then we had a visual kind of org chart aspect to it as well. So they all kind of fit together.
That's fantastic, because then that's when you all agree on what those different titles or those, are, right? In terms of what those personas are, then you can also add it to a CRM. And then it's even more clear when something is missing, when there's a gap on an account, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You have the standardization, and making that sort of a group process even, right? And talking through it together, so everyone's thinking about that, thinking strategically.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great, Jillian. Yeah, you should put that on your resume. Or at least certainly make it one of your talking points in the interview.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
lots of things to go on there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Fran.
Thanks. I was just going to say, it was something I brought up in our group that I really thought about, how we all need to make those connections as we join new organizations. You need to build those relationships again, out this way as well as up and down. And I thought, and I don't know if this is true, so I would love to hear people's opinions, that a way to sort of protect yourself a little bit from the next layoff is to build those relationships both vertically and horizontally, always making sure that people know the value that you're bringing to the goals of the company. Just like with our customers, we have to make sure that we're helping them achieve their goals, what success looks like for them. We have to be doing the same thing for our own company, because I know in my last role, I was doing some work, but I wasn't quite there yet. And I really wasn't adding enough value at the time. And I think that's one of the reasons that I got laid off. And so I feel like one way to save ourselves might be to just really build those relationships, ensuring that enough people know all the value that you're bringing to the company and all of the success you're bringing to your organization.
Yeah, and oftentimes companies have to make tough decisions, right? And so if you can show that you're losing just a bit more from you, like if they lay you off, like that can make the difference. Unfortunately, you're sometimes, vying between different people with those layoffs. And then sometimes it doesn't make a difference. They just have to cut what they cut. But, do what you can. Obviously, yeah. Parth.
I just want to counter that and say that if you're on the job market right now, I would ask that as a qualifying question to the hiring manager. How are you quantifying the impact of your team? How does the VP or director look at that same thing? So if they're not doing that, then I wouldn't be too interested in working in that type of organization, because it's going to be hard for you to go out there and prove your value when your manager and director don't even know how to quantify the impact of the team. If they're not able to do that, the VPs aren't going to know, and the C-level folks aren't going to know. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, absolutely. Quantifying your value as part of that. But then again, understanding who you're working with. If they are starting to, if they understand that, hey, you get me, and when I work with you, it's easy and all of those things, and you've communicated your value and what you're bringing to it. It's sort of a combination. It's not just broadcasting to everybody, but it's also helping them feel heard and seen as well, right? Yeah, great addition, Parth. Well, we have gone well over tonight. I don't know if there's any last word we should share, but I just started thinking I'm going to build out some sort of mapping template on spreadsheet. So if anybody wants to share ideas about what should go in that, let me know. But just started thinking about, like, I can't just do a session and not give you a template for this as well. So just a way to track some of these things. But if there's a way in which you've tracked it that you want to share, feel free to do that with me as well. But anyway, any last words to share on this topic? I hope folks have gotten something from it. Yeah. Well, great. Next week we're going to do pipeline. looking at your book of business pipeline, and as a CS leader, looking at your overall pipeline. This can also be for how you project revenues or how you understand what new accounts are coming in that you need to handle onboarding. Pipeline can be throughout the whole customer journey. And then that will lead into the following week when we're talking about not just pipeline and how that gets communicated up to the board and things like that, but also, and for planning, but then also how you do conversion rates and checking your metrics on that pipeline. There we go. All right. Well, I hope that's useful to folks today, and I will see you in the community and see you next week. Oh, March 19th, we're doing it at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. So I'll announce that in as many places as I can, but I also try and spread the word in case, you know, you're trying to show up at 4:30 Pacific or in the evening. Okay, see you soon.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.